my only addition to that isn't to disagree with you, but just to say that on top of the very good points you make, you've got general brand inertia, which says if there was orange branded bog roll on the shelf at Sainsbury's, and it would even go with the Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's got an orange logo, so you'd think that'd be a natural fit, wouldn't you? Yeah. I'd be like, well, I'm not fucking buying that. I mean, and what's the worst that could happen? You know, it's not going to set my arse on fire, is it? But
might.
I still
might put a 5G signal up your arse
instead of smoke.
Yeah, bloke smoke. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Ian, you look like you're about to cough. Are you all right? You don't have to hold back.
No, I just adjusting my position.
Okay.
It's hard work these days.
So yeah, today's like one of the few sort of gloomy, not so warm days we've had in the past month.
It's been like that this week though, hasn't it?
You and I go to Wimbledon next week.
Yeah.
So we want the weather to be good next Thursday. Yeah. Pierre was just sitting there going, I hope it bloody rains.
Well, the thing is, if we're on centre court or number one court, it doesn't matter.
It's covered anyway. Just get the roof up.
Yeah. I hope they just
yours,
cancel.
We'll get to tell you all about it the next day because that's when we're doing the pod. And we got a guest coming up for that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Thursday is what, second, third round?
Something like that.
It's the start of the third round, I think. Yeah, Monday, Tuesday. No, it'd be end of second round stuff. It's good. Yeah, second round still, which is a good day to watch things, I think.
There's so many
There's a lot to choose from. You'll see big names in it as well, but there's sort of some of the...
You're going to see David Beckham, Kate, all the stars.
No, they don't show up till the final.
Do you reckon we won't get like the little VIP area and the bubbly like we had at the French Open?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
If they did it like they did it last year, there's a Vodafone lounge that you just hang out in, and you're able
to like compare.
You're able to have a few drinks and some food, and then you get your tickets and go onto the court, but you can come back at any time to the lounge.
Yeah, every step of the way you should be like, well, Orange did it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a similar kind of setup. It's not like a box that leads out onto the actual seats area, so you have to sort of walk from the lounge to go to your seats. But it's,
in fact, talking about that, Pierre, I did. I won't name them, but I was speaking to the representative of another major UK operator, so that fucking whittles it down a bit. And going, well, Orange took us to French Open. Vodafone's taken us to Wimbledon. What are you all up to?
So, and you're a customer.
I think if anyone from HR or compliance at Informa thinks that sounds like soliciting a bribe, it's not. It was just a joke. Although if I did then get a bribe, I would gleefully accept it. Yes. So I guess I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to bribery.
It wouldn't be a bribe to just want to talk to you in a different setting.
Exactly. Yeah, is it?
I think it's a difficult one in our profession anyway, because the whole going out with companies over a few drinks, because what else are you going to do when you're sitting there for hours finding out what they're doing is just par for the course, really. So, as long as you're not taking business class flights to go yachting in New Zealand, I think
what's wrong with that?
That's too far away.
No, I mean, but only partially. Joking aside, I know like reading historically has been a bit more US style and strict about like paying its own way and that sort of thing to ensure complete neutrality, and that all comes from the right place.
And certainly with advertisers as well. Certainly on the vendor side, even more so, I would say.
Whereas my approach is take all their bribes and write what the fuck I want anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose it does leave you open to accusations of bias if you do state an opinion.
It does, because the trouble with that is that if you ever wanted to write a positive write-up of somebody, people would be able to turn around and say, well, that's because you got a bribe, isn't it? And then it becomes harder to defend that you just thought it was a good launch announcement, yeah?
You get points because you're disclosing it right now.
Well, quite. I mean, in a purist ideal world, you don't accept anything from anyone. But here in the summer, we're still using Danielle Royston's Yeti. It's still doing us proud. And so you could say, but I don't think either of us have ever written something excessively accommodating about Danielle and her position on public cloud.
No.
So my conscience is clear. But thanks anyway, Danielle. Right. What are we going to chat about this week? We're going to start by talking about how Orange has been having a go at banking. And that's not a euphemism or rhyming slang. And now I thought, no, perhaps not. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to talk about a big new sort of partnership alliance, strategic partnership, I think they're calling it, between Nokia and Red Hat over cloudy stuff that I wrote up superficially. You actually listened in on the briefing call, and you basically know 10 times more about this than I do. So I'm going to represent our audience in a sort of, what's that all about then, Ian?
Right,
way, and then you're going to patiently sort of explain all these abstract things and then give me imploring looks while I sit there going, right. So that'll be how that plays out. And then we're going to finish off with, it's sort of a Scott Pacino self-indulgent TM thing, talking about politics, but not politics in general, like, you know, fuck the Tories or whatever, but politics as it affects tech and telecoms. There've been a couple of things in the UK, a couple of things in Ireland, something in the States. So there's just a lot of political involvement in our space that I'd like to go over and possibly rant about a bit.
Mm-hmm. Especially always good for a rant.
Yeah, especially where it affects things like freedom of speech, which, as we know, is something I have strong feelings on. And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and loads of other podcasting platforms. And I believe, Pierre, it's time to talk about who's been listening to us.
Oh, it's the actual last day of the month. It's pretty rare when it's...
Quite literally.
Yeah. Although, wait, no, it's already the 2nd. Third.
Yeah, by the time they listen to it. But we're recording this on the 30th. Stop being pedantic.
Yeah. We have a trifecta, a podium of British cities. Yeah.
Ah, excellent.
First one starts with SW.
Swansea.
Swindon.
Correct.
Why is it always Swindon?
Because there's that sort of M4 corridor. There's a lot of sort of
Starting to make me feel like David Brent.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, whereas Vodafone's Newbury,
isn't it?
Vodafone's Newbury, maybe that comes under Swindon in Pierre's reckoning.
I think in The Office, actually, they had 2 offices, didn't they?
Oh,
there was a Swindon and the Slough office, and they merged, didn't they, at the start of the series? They caused a lot of the... Remember with Neil coming in and being his boss, and he thought he was going to get the boss job? And
I remember one with the many funny bits from The Office towards the end, where I think David Brent got sacked or something, and he goes, "I'll be back. Swindon's a big place."
But so Swindon is far in the lead for some reason, and then
I reckon it's Newbury. I reckon it's Vodafone. Thanks, Vodafone, because we've been banging on about 3Dafone, haven't we?
Oh yeah, there you go. And then the second and third, very close to each other, Kingston upon Thames, and yours truly, London.
Just London in general.
Kingston upon Thames has its own operators, isn't it?
That's it.
Has its own carrier. Yeah, what's it called? There's a tiny one that just does that area, isn't it?
Oh, I see.
It's quite a bit of an anomaly, I think, in the UK.
Like the one that does Hull.
Well,
there's one that just does Hull. Which, with all due respect to Hull, maybe an interesting place to specialise in.
Yeah, anyway.
Cool, all right. Well, thanks, England. Hurrah. I mean, it's slightly more fun when it's like Guatemala City or fucking Zanzibar or something.
I know. Is that Phone World Kingston? No, that's something else. I can't find it, sorry.
Maybe I imagined it. It's possible.
And we haven't been out and about this week, so we don't need to go on about that. And
I broke my toe.
Oh, and Pierre broke his toe, and you still limped in anyway, so
your hand
fair play to Pierre on that one. You broke your toe playing football?
Yeah.
Was it one of those David Beckham type of injuries?
No, I just smashed my foot into some other guy's foot. He just planted it down, so he just didn't move. Mine, yeah. I kept playing, like it was stupid. And then I went into
what a trooper.
E&E just to get the picture, confirm it. And then, as always, they told me, like, yeah, just don't touch it, don't do anything.
Right.
Just keep your foot flat.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, it was all right when you were, like, cycling and walking in?
Yeah, I realised my foot doesn't move too much, yeah.
Cool. Well, I see. So it's when you flex the toe.
Yeah. I can't flex it at all.
Right.
And it doesn't hurt when I don't do anything, so it's not too bad.
Just play to your strengths and don't do anything.
Yeah. There's only 6 weeks as well, so that's interesting.
Oh, what a drag.
Yeah.
Is that going to get away with summer holidays?
That should be just before. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's crack on then. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the cricket because that's going really badly as we speak.
It's still going on.
Oh, yeah. Well, test matches last 5 days and there's 5 of them.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so it's going to keep going into August. But to be honest, the way things are going, no one's going to give a shit after this one because we'll probably lose again and then we'll be 2-0 down and then it'll be just game over.
Do they bother playing the other 3?
Yeah. Oh. To be honest, historically, when we play Australia normally beats England.
So it's like best out of 5?
Yeah. But historically, they go 3-0 up, and then we end up winning one towards the end when they can't really be asked anymore.
Oh, Australia's always better.
Australia is generally better, yeah. We've had a few highlights, but they're generally better at cricket than us in the last few decades. Certainly the whole time I've been following.
The last century.
More or less, yeah.
In the time that cricket's existed, they're generally better than us.
Well, I mean, the reason that the series is called the Ashes is because when they first beat us about 100 plus years ago, I think it was late 1800s, I think the Times wrote an obituary, it was like R.I.P. English cricket. And then the Aussies joined in the joke and created this little urn, which apparently had the ashes of English cricket or the ashes of one of the bails from one of the stumps or something like that.
People don't know that,
so
but that's quite sad given what's been going on ever since.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but we've called it the Ashes ever since.
And it's just celebrating England's demise, and we're still losing.
Yeah, well, bear in mind, like late 1800s, the thought of us losing to some bloody colonials, it was inconceivable. Shocking. And actually, there's been a lot of competition ever since. There's been like Bodyline, where it was quite contentious at the time to bowl like bouncers and all that sort of thing. Anyway,
I don't know what that means.
Bodyline's when you're basically trying to take the person out rather than the wicket. Yeah, it was controversial because people getting
throwing
injured.
the ball at the body rather than any other way. It's contentious at the time. Now it's quite normal. In fact, in this particular test match, one of the reasons we're shit is because the Aussies did it well and we had no counter for it. Anyway, this isn't a cricket podcast, although we could easily start one. I bet you'd love to produce that, wouldn't you, Pierre?
Oh my God. To two listeners.
But I mean, yeah.
Charlie would listen.
Yeah, Charlie would listen.
He's kind of mentioned now about 3 times in a row, I think, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Well, he has now. He got some good value from getting that round in. Talking about bribery. Okay, so let's start by talking about Orange. You wrote this up and I didn't. We did cover it, but Mary wrote it up for us. So why don't you start? What's Orange been up to this week, Ian?
So they the history of it is they basically started a bank off a few years ago. This all goes back to 2016, I think, when they bought a majority stake in this little bank called Groupama Bank, which they bought from. Groupama is like an insurance company, and it had a small bank called Groupama Bank, and they bought a 65% stake in it. So
let's have a little go at banking.
Yeah, and Groupama retained the 35% of it, and then they sort of embarked on this diversification strategy to push into mobile financial services. Obviously been doing a bit of mobile stuff in Africa, mobile money and all that stuff.
Yeah, where it's quite popular.
This was very much a French thing, set up a bank in France and expand it into other countries in Europe. And
it's worth briefly recapping. One of the reasons sort of mobile money and stuff took off in Africa is because regular banking is much less broadly accessible.
Yeah.
So just bypassing the regular system and going straight to offering financial services as an operator
and this
wasn't more sense in Africa.
This wasn't doing that, by the way. Obviously, this was
right. This was regular banking.
Regular bank.
Why does Orange need to be involved in regular banking?
Well, so I guess strategically, they're always looking for new growth opportunities. And with there being no growth left in telecom, really, everybody's got a broadband connection, everybody's got a phone, nobody wants to spend more on the two things.
Yeah, and so we're looking for ARPU in sort of less conventional
If you're going to make
areas.
more money, you've either got two options. One's to grumble about the internet companies and ask them to pay you some money, which is a big debate that's going on in the industry. And the other one's to try and find something else to actually do that's useful that you can make money in. And they thought their banking sector is ripe for disruption in the same way that telecom was ripe for disruption when the internet companies came along, clearly. And Stéphane Richard, who was the CEO at the time, in justifying this, and executives there and answering questions about why it was a good idea for a telco to become a bank, were coming out with things like, which made sense. They're used to dealing with customers. Yeah, customer relationship very important in retail banking, obviously, and arguably they don't do it very well. Banks, I don't think people.
And that's often been an argument in favour of telecom diversification. Is they have quite an intimate relationship with their subscribers.
They do, yeah.
And if only they could offer some other shit, they could.
So here's the other thing: people like the idea. I think, although there's an idea that people like the idea of buying lots of services from one source. So like my parents, for instance, have some company called Utility Warehouse that pretty much does all their utility stuff, the energy and the gas, but they also get their broadband through them. I mean, it's obviously on another company's network, but it's this idea of convergence or service bundling is probably a better description of it, but for convenience, just deal with one company that provides a full range of services to you for your various household and life needs. And Orange can obviously play that role. They have a huge network of, like any traditional operator, a huge network of shops and stores, in France, and they're places people can go into and talk to staff and, set up accounts.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is they had this idea that, they could build this quite whizzy app, like a mobile banking app, and make it a bit more responsive and feature-rich than some of the ones that were around at the time. This is going back to 2016, right?
Yeah.
So,
but it's still, I mean, that obviously hindsight's always 2020, but building good apps is not necessarily a telco core competence, is it?
Yeah. So, what's happened is several years later after, and we can explain what's gone on, but the big news item really this week is that they're now looking to get out of the whole thing, essentially. They've entered into negotiations with BNP Paribas,
which is a regular French bank, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you read, it's a bit of a mealy-mouthed statement, I think, but if you sort of read between the lines of it, it sounds like what's happening is they're looking for someone to come along and take the customers off their hands, essentially, and not allow them to just not have a banking service anymore.
Right.
Which
so they're trying
implies
to have a coherent, responsible handover. Is
handover of stuff, which implies they might not even get very much money for this, right?
I see.
The only thing the only mention of the word takeover in the statement is with regards to Orange Spain, the Orange Bank Spain part of the whole affair. But it sounds like the French side of it, really what they're doing is they're in negotiations to support a handover of customers and also the app itself, or at least ensure that customers can have an alternative to that BNP Paribas would provide, and that they don't lose access to any of their products. And then the bullet points at the start of the statement include things like the intention is to exit the retail banking sector completely.
Yeah.
This doesn't apply, by the way, to anything that's going on in Africa, where they've also now upped their game in terms of financial services, and they are doing a similar thing with the bank. But so this is very much about the European banking stuff.
Yeah.
And if you sort of think, so what's gone wrong between this 2016 acquisition of Groupama Banque and what's going on now with these negotiations? It just hasn't really gone anywhere, know. And the writing's probably been on the wall for a little while. I mean, they had some comments some news stories coming out and statements published back in 2021 when they were looking to do a capital increase, and Groupama, the insurance company, didn't want to participate in that, and they ended up taking they couldn't find other investors, basically, another partner to kind of replace Groupama that clearly just wanted to get out of it all, and ended up taking over full control and pumping another 230 million euros into it. And then there were reports, I think, in the French press last year about them engaging a bank there to try and find interested parties who might be willing to come over and buy it. And it sounds like they're now at the stage of just trying to get rid of the whole thing and maybe not get anything at all. And you look at the stats. I mean, I went over the metrics because they are published in the annual reports, obviously. I mean, the customer numbers. So I remember interviewing the guy who was actually in charge of the whole thing at the time when they first talked about all of this. And he was like, well, we've done a survey, right? And a third of our customers in France, which was at the time about 27 million, I think, have expressed interest in using Orange for banking purposes if we were to provide a bank. So you think, okay, that's about 9 million potential subscribers. Not to sort of, that's ignoring Spain and other countries in the footprint where they might want to roll out the service as well.
So Orange has 27 million subscribers.
27 in France, yeah.
Damn. It's like 40%.
Well, they're the only fixed. They're a bit like BT, aren't they? You've got other fixed line operators using their network, and you've got a few companies that are building out their own fibre. But
I'm surprised. It's impressive.
Well, that's mobile and fixed.
Right.
That's sort of customer numbers. Yeah.
Wow. So did you think someone like SFR or Bouygues,
like my mom is SFR, for example. Yeah,
but what's the population of France? 70 million.
Yeah, like 68. Yeah.
70 million then ish. So it's not.
Yeah.
There's not 10 providers in France, is there?
No. Yeah. It's still like, wow.
So
sorry.
So if you think sort of
carry on.
9 million people potentially as subscribers, but and then you're thinking about what they could do in Spain and other countries in the region. Well, the whole thing, which I think is really only France and Spain, is where it's actually been rolled out today or end of March, is 2 million, which is not very good, really. And they even had a target.
That's what number of customers?
Number of customers, yeah. They've clearly missed their expectations on.
Yeah, well, I think you might be about to say this, but I noticed from our reporting on it that we link back to something Jamie wrote in December 2018. The headline: Orange plans banking profitability by 2023. Well, here we are.
Right. So on profitability, so I went through all the accounts that you can dig out of their. I can't remember what they're called, registration documents they're called. Their annual reports are really hard to find, or just proper annual reports.
Really?
Like the whole thing, yeah. And they've lost, since they launched it, they've lost 1.025 billion on it. Is the total operating losses.
Woof.
Like net banking income is how they measure, this is just never really sort of...
Yeah.
The targets that they announced, I think back in 2020, 2021, were for the end of this year. They were going to have 5 million customers, and this is probably a downgrade from what they were previously expecting. And, as Jamie wrote then, they were expecting it to be profitable. It's still, last year it was a 200 million operating loss.
One thing that only just occurs to me now, because I was thinking, is banking a great sector to want to get into anyway? You used to think it was a license to print money.
Yeah.
It's become quite dicey through a combination of sort of macro turbulence and regulation and all that sort of thing. And certainly in the last year, in this inflationary environment, seems to have been bad for banks. We keep hearing about how, what was it, Credit Suisse and even Deutsche Bank having a nightmare.
The Silicon Valley.
And Silicon Valley Bank and that other one, Signature.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of that, which all seems to have been linked to inflation and overexposure to the bond markets in ways that I sort of understand when it's explained to me, and then I understand it as soon as I stop thinking about it.
It's by design.
In their case, it seems to be simpler than that, though. I mean, just failing to attract very many customers, and 2 million across France and Spain, that's a figure for the whole of Europe, Orange Europe Bank.
Yeah, it's not a lot, is it?
2 million. At a time, as I say, this guy back in 2016 was saying a third of our customers in France have expressed interest. By 2020, they're talking about wanting to have 5 million customers by the end of 2023. Well, they were clearly going to miss that target, weren't they? Because it's grown by 400,000 in the last 2 years. The number. So they just haven't attracted customers. And I'm thinking, Stefan Richard clearly underestimated how hard it would be to go and disrupt the banking establishment. And the point you made, I think, is a brilliant one about the app. Like the app I use, I don't know who you're with, but I use Smile as a bank, and their mobile app is excellent. It's better than the app. I hate to say it, BT, but it's better than the customer services app.
And I will say the same for I use Lloyd's, and their app is better than the EE app.
Right. So
the EE app isn't bad, but it's just a bit clunky. It's a bit slow.
It's clunky and slow. It's not responsive.
The UI has improved a little bit because I have to use it because I've got that thing set up where I buy a shitload of data and then I have to gift it to the rest of my family. So I have to use it at least once a month. And just often it's just a bit slow and clunky.
Slow and clunky. And the other thing is, like you just said, you don't need to be I think there's this assumption that because we're a telecom operator, we're a tech company, we're more like a tech company than a bank is. Banks hire software people, and they can pay them a lot of money. They can build mobile apps just as well as a telco.
Well, that is the broader issue. This is just one in a sequence of sort of quixotic attempts by opcos to diversify into areas which they don't have a core competence. They chuck a bit of money at it. I mean, they didn't just lose a bill because they were doing fuck all.
Yeah.
They chuck a bit of money at it. But what really interests me, I think we might have discussed this back, when we were getting presentations by Vodafone, how they're moving from being a telco to a techco and all that sort of thing. And last I checked in, I don't know if they were struggling, but I don't think they'd got a long way towards their target of geeks that they were going to hire.
Well, and also I suspect that strategy is now under review anyway, given they're trying to get rid of about 11,000 people.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, that's a really good point. But it's that cultural thing. I think it's really hard. I found it very interesting for the last 9 years working for a FTSE 100 company, and just observing how do you institute change in a company this big? And we've got this.
You do training courses.
Yeah. let's not go there. We'll get in trouble. We were just talking before we started. There's a bunch of training courses we're supposed to have done by the end of the month, and so there's been a bit of a last minute rush. But yeah, that's there. I mean, I'll be the first to admit those training courses, without getting into them individually, are a bit sort of one size fits all.
Yeah.
But I suppose they have to be. When you've got a big company and then you've got certain boxes you want to tick, then you're gonna get this sort of cookie cutter approach. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that so much as just observing how do you make this super tanker change direction. And there are all sorts of processes, and there's all sorts of layers, and there's people involved. And I've got an appreciation of it, because you can't just send an email going, just fucking do this. Because people will do it for a week or a month, and then they'll revert back. Actually instituting this full-on change within a large organisation isn't straightforward. Because a lot of culture we're not even necessarily consciously aware of. Yep. It's just there. But culture, you could say, often is just a form of collective mental inertia. And there'll be certain things that you'll instinctively push back on. You're not even sure why. You just know that when they're suggested, you're like, no, I don't like to fucking look at that.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to diversification. And I stress here, we're talking about diversifying into different areas, not diversification as increasingly as a way, which is talking about DEI and all that stuff.
Yeah.
How do you make a company that's entirely geared towards selling minutes and megabytes and handsets? How do you get them into selling other concepts like financial services or whatever? And it's always happened. I always talk back like 20 years ago to Vodafone 360. Oh yeah, let's I've got to find which one of the colder ones out of these.
I mean, I think the things that they had on their side in doing this that Stefan Richard talked up, like the customer relationships and the stores and the ability to bundle things with the banking service that they're providing, were all very well. But what they didn't have, I mean, the cultural stuff's really interesting, but they also didn't have all that expertise and experience. I mean, if anybody comes along and goes, we're going to go into telecom and we're going to build a network.
Well, that's part of it, isn't it?
They're quite good at going, you don't really know how hard it is to build a telecom network. You've got no experience at all.
Yeah.
And then they go and laugh at people like Rakuten and others who attempt to do it and find it really hard and expensive. And it's like, that's why we're so good.
Your point about personnel and culture overlaps, because you can buy expertise.
Yeah, you can.
But they're
not in a good position to do that.
Well, there's that. So there's that. But presumably part of this bill that they've got through is buying that expertise. But then you've got a group of people who do know what they're talking about, helicoptered into an organisation that doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's not that easy. I mean, like one little thing I brought up a few times, it's not necessarily a good example, but one we have personal experience of in terms of like integration after M&A. So like Light Reading was bought by Informa in 2016, and we both have experience looking at it from opposite sides of the fence of how, it's not necessarily straightforward to have what was a standalone small company suddenly within the framework of this large company. Obviously all your cultural inertia and all your relations are going to be geared towards continuing to interact with each other.
Yeah.
Steve, Ray, John Keller, all those people, Joe Donnelly were there at the time. And it doesn't happen overnight that suddenly you're interacting with the rest of the company.
No, it doesn't.
And that's no one's fault.
Well, I mean,
it's just inertia.
It's been a really long process.
Yeah.
And it's probably not worked out the way it was all supposed to have worked out anyway. It's worked out in a different way. Not necessarily saying it's better or worse, but ultimately.
I don't think Plan A in 2016 has necessarily been borne out.
No, I just think that it's kind of a bit sad in a way, I think, because one thing that occurred to me is, given these parallels that he obviously saw between running a telecom operation and running a bank, and there are some, I agree with him.
Yeah, the intimate customer relationship.
Totally, yeah, and
the regular. I mean, they could probably be fooled into thinking because they have a regular commercial interaction with subscribers that translates to a banking one. Sorry, I butted in, but
no, it's fine.
Another thing that occurred to me.
But yeah, totally, and it being one of those must-have services. Everybody needs a bank in the same way they need a telecom service, and there's a convenience factor of getting it from one place, and all that stuff. You sort of think if they can't make a stab of it there, and then you've seen what's happened with other ventures into adjacent industries, let's call them, like TV, which has been a disaster, really, I think, on the whole for telcos. For
all of them. And we've spoken about it.
Nobody's done a good job of that. I think Orange actually got out of some TV assets not that long ago, I seem to remember, last year or earlier this year. There was some stuff it sold on the TV side. I mean,
But compared to AT&T, which is the daddy,
AT&T's the one that's the total disaster. But BT's had this, it's spun off its stuff and
sport into Discovery and all that.
It's none of them have really made a success of that. And that's an area where you at the time, I remember writing about this when I first got into telecom journalism, and I was working with Ken Wheeland, who's now one of our freelancers at Horizon House, and we spent a lot of time writing about IPTV, and what the opportunity was for telcos. And you sort of thought, this is an area we can see them doing quite well if they get their act together, and they didn't. And you kind of think,
you can see the perceived synergies.
You can see the synergies, totally.
We provide the pipe into the house. Why don't we provide what goes through the pipe? Sort of thing.
Completely. And I sort of think if it's that hard for them in these areas, then if you think about things that are a little bit more challenging and a bit more out there, where they have to really kind of adapt culturally and they have to acquire some new expertise, how are they going to get on with that? I mean, one interesting thing I think about this banking failure is I wonder these days whether people do want to buy all their stuff from one single provider. This feeling that they've had that bundling is, you get your mobile, you get your broadband, now you get your banking, maybe you get your energy, and that might appeal to some people. But, telcos themselves don't want to be overly reliant on one supplier for too many things. And
that'll come up in our next segment as well.
Their customers sort of feel the same way.
Yeah, and
perhaps.
I'm thinking as a customer, I think most customers do some kind of total cost of ownership calculation.
Yeah.
Even if it's just the proverbial back of a fag packet, they'll have some instinctive sense of, like one TCO thing that always used to come up is you get a phone on a postpaid plan. And so you pay £60 a month for an iPhone for 2 years. And so that's obviously 2,400. No, I fucked that maths up. What is it? 60 times 24 is about £1,500.
Yeah.
And the iPhone itself costs £900. And so you can do that sort of back of a fag packet.
It doesn't work out as well as actually buying it.
Yeah, it doesn't work out. And I think some people might increasingly do what I do, which is I always buy SIM-free.
Yeah.
I mean, bear in mind that this is where we have to thank as someone who is sort of a light touch regulation person instinctively. Here's an example of where regulation's been good, because operators used to be able to lock phones, didn't they?
They did.
So that you couldn't stick another operator's SIM card in your phone.
Yeah.
And there'd be whole little secondary services of unlocking phones and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now you can't do that, and I think that's thanks to regulations. Probably thanks to the EU, which I say through clenched teeth.
Yeah.
And so now, obviously, the smart thing to do is to buy a SIM-only contract and then get your phone from whatever, either direct from the provider or secondhand or whatever. And so, but I think the reason I was going off on that TCO tangent is if they could demonstrate that a TCO for getting your telecoms, your banking, your telly, your utilities, your fucking bog roll, whatever, all from this one place is lower than getting it separately, then I think that would be a compelling argument. But just saying, it's easier than shopping around, I think, as you say, people want to shop around.
They want to shop around. I mean, one thing it does, and I think this is maybe customers have worked this out actually themselves, is it creates stickiness. I hate these words.
Yeah,
it creates stickiness, which means basically it's much harder for you to shift because you've got to find alternatives.
In other words, it makes you easier to exploit.
Yeah, exactly, totally. And I think people go, well, actually, I don't want to be in a position where I've got 10 different services that I've got to find suppliers for. If something goes wrong with this one, or I'm suddenly unhappy with them, I've got this real problem on my hands. People aren't stupid; they work this stuff out after a while. Operators themselves are going on about this, so why shouldn't their own customers feel the same way? I just wonder whether this convergence thing, it's been a big deal in Europe over the last few years, this idea of having, at the very basic side of it, the very basic, before you start talking about things like energy and banking and services that have nothing to do with telecom, it was always about getting your broadband and your mobile from the same provider, really.
Yeah. And
I'm not sure it's been done very well, to be honest with you. I mean, I hate doing these personal, like, Which magazine type stories, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I'm a BT subscriber and I'm also an EE subscriber, and I don't have a bundled service. No. I don't have you get the two of them together, and you'd think that the company themselves would look at what's going on with
me. Well, famously last time,
and try and make some offer to me to
famously when I last went into a BT/EE shop, the sales assistant was very helpful and talked me into not going with EE for my broadband anymore and going back to BT because I get a better deal.
Right.
So and how long has it been since they merged? Like 8 years?
Yeah, and they're still using.
They still haven't got their story straight.
I mean.
But then that's another illustration back to what I was saying about the difficulty of integration.
It is difficult, but I think nowadays, 2016, by the way, is when BT bought EE.
Right.
So this is a long time ago now. That's a long time in the bigger scheme of things. I mean, 7 years' time, we're supposed to have 6G, yeah?
Yeah,
so,
I barely had any grey hair back then.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a measure of it. And and you think that in that amount of time, they'd have been able to, everybody knows probably, even the man on the street who doesn't really pay much attention to telecom now probably knows BT and EE is the same thing, because it's even on their, one thing they have done is put it on the shop windows, haven't they? The stores, it says BT EE. They're almost using that as the brand. BT, yeah. So why can't they do things in a slightly more joined up manner and get rid of some of the separate branding? And you'd have thought that was one thing that Philip Jansen might have sorted out. He wasn't the guy who bought EE, but you thought he might have come in and tried to figure that out. And he doesn't seem to. I don't see signs of much progress apart from what I see on the shop window fronts to change that.
No, other than I'm generally happy with my service with both. Switched to fibre, and that was done well. They did fuck up the first OpenReach appointment. They just didn't turn up.
Actual glass fibre or copper?
What?
Oh, mate, you're out your depth there. Fibre's, there's only one kind of fibre, and that doesn't involve copper.
There was a fibre that I had before that was maxed at 120 megs, and now I have a fibre that's maxed at 3 gigs.
Maybe what you had was fibre to the cabinet and then copper for the last mile, the last bit.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah, that's what I got. Yeah. Yes, that's what I meant by copper.
Okay, all right. I thought you were just making a dick of yourself for a sec.
As in
all these years of listening to us bang on about it.
When you get the separate extra box in your home.
That's right. Yeah.
Do you have that?
Yeah, I do have that now. Yeah, although funnily enough, the fibre is through a pole. It's not through the ground.
Yeah, same for me. Yeah.
But yes, so I think that's what you were talking about is something, and there's been lots of contentious stuff about how they advertise and describe these things. Because fibre to the cabinet, you basically, you're only as fast as your shittest technology.
Yeah.
So you could have fibre all the way to your doorstep, but if the last bit's copper, that's going to slow it the fuck down.
Yeah, it's like fibre up to here, and then 100 people share.
Having copper the whole distance, but
so there will be some proportionate
but it's to
the amount. Yeah. But yeah, so you're talking about full fibre, and so that's all good. And I'm happy with my contract and the savings I get through gifting and all that. So I think on the whole, on the whole, they do it well. But I completely agree with you. And let's not forget this segment's more about Orange. But the reason we went off on this tangent is just to do with just trying to do things a bit differently.
Yeah,
and it just seems to be incredibly difficult for them to do it. I don't quite know why. I mean, there's a whole industry about change management and management consultants and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't get done. You'd think they could just go, all right, let's just make sure that our best broadband deals are BT, our best mobile deals are E. Obviously, we don't have BT as an MVNO anymore, do we? And that's that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
the other ones that I'm aware of on this sort of diversification stuff. I think there's a couple of companies in the former Yugoslavian area that do. Maybe it's parts of Telekom Austria. I don't know. Maybe I've got that because they have subsidiaries there, but they've gone into sort of energy game.
Right.
And I don't know how that's worked out for them. And then in North America, in Canada, you've got TELUS, which does things to do with healthcare.
That's right.
And I think they've made quite a success of it, but I don't know how much that's to do with organic growth or just buying stuff and then all of a sudden...
Yeah, because you were in the room when we chatted to that lady. Was it Mobile Congress this year or the year before?
It was...
and there was a TELUS lady talking about...
It was neither. Oh. It was last year in
Digital Transformation World.
And it was
with
Bearing Point Beyond.
There we are.
To give the company their
and they introduced us to this lady from TELUS. She was talking about the healthcare stuff. I think there was a fair bit of M&A involved in that. I think this
is the thing. So I spoke to James Crawshaw at Omdi a little bit afterwards, and he was like, "Yeah, well, it's not like Orange. What they did is bought a small business that really wasn't that significant at all. I mean, I don't know how many customers Groupama Bank actually had when they came in." Which obviously the higher it is, it makes the 2 million look even more shit. But
if they were actively lost people,
I mean, they haven't lost people, but
yeah,
but yeah, I think what TELUS has done is gone in and bought big healthcare stuff that was actually quite established and making a lot of money. So
healthcare is one of the least intuitive ones. Like energy, I can see because telecoms is to some extent a utility. So, there's all sorts of areas where you can see the telecoms business Venn diagram overlaps with other bits like content, like other utilities, like even banking. I think banking is one of the ones that's a bit less intuitive.
It's a bit less, but I can see there being, I hate the word, but synergies.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to, if you're going into the banking sector as a new entrant, it's like, well, we have to make all this investment in infrastructure. Well, they've already got the branch equivalents of, with their stores that they have throughout France. So,
high street presence,
so you save a lot of money on things like that. I mean, they might even had a bigger presence than the little Groupama Bank that they bought. I don't know, but but they had things that you could see there were sort of overlaps, and certainly being able to upsell it, as they say, to your customer base. You've got this big installed base of 27 million people or whatever that you're serving in France, that you can go out and say, do you want to come and take a banking service from us as well? Sounds like they should have been able to have some success, but I think they obviously just underestimated how the banks would respond to some extent, and underestimated how hard it is to acquire banking expertise. Perhaps, I mean, there's a lot we don't know. This story might come out. If you
think about it from a branding and marketing point of view, you think of something like Lloyds Bank, who I bank with, and I picked them when I was a student because my mum was with them.
Yeah.
And I didn't really give it that much thought. But Lloyds Bank has been hammering us with Black Horse messaging and branding and imagery for our entire lives.
Yeah.
So we know Lloyds Bank, Black Horse. I mean, what that has to say about banking is another matter.
Would you buy a telephone service from Lloyds Bank?
Well, there we go. But as a brand, because I find branding really interesting.
We can do that too.
Like you think about when you get to the supermarket and you're going to buy anything, there'll always be a branding implication. You're going to buy, let's say you can't be fucked to make your own pasta sauce.
Yeah.
Dolmio's the market leader as far as brands go. Or Bogrol, Andrex, or whatever. I find branding fascinating because it's so arbitrary, and yet it's really, really pervasive. Like I always buy Andrex. I don't know why. I don't know if it's better Bogrol.
But that's an interesting point, though, because with something like that, like with bog roll, if someone else came along and they were
tried to orange bog roll.
But you'd be less worried about buying it, would you? Because it's bog roll, right? If you don't like the first time you try it.
I'd be offended. But if it's on the shelf, let's say, because
it's toilet paper, just for American.
Yeah. So bog roll means toilet paper.
If you got a new toilet paper, if you saw Orange had gone into doing toilet paper and you bought, you'd be tempted.
I wouldn't buy it.
Yeah, no, but all I'm saying is I think this is one of the problems with going into banking, and the question about would you buy a telecom service from Lloyds. I'd be more likely to get a telecom service from Lloyds than a banking service from BT.
Why?
And here's to your point about all the troubles that banks have had in the last few years. People are worried about bank runs, about banks going out of business. Right. You saw what happened a few years ago, not very long ago, 2008. Your banks is your money. Right,
I once had a mortgage with Northern Rock.
When you put your money somewhere, you want that person that you've put your money with to know exactly what they're doing. If you take a telephone service out, especially if it's one of the internet companies coming along, as they probably will in a few years' time, and function as MVNOs, and they'll probably say, you can try this for a month, and if you don't like it, forget about it. You'd be prepared to try it because the worst. What's the worst that can happen? You drop a few calls or something. Yeah. What's the worst that can happen with a bank? Your money's gone.
Yeah, totally.
Right. There's some complete cock. You have to have a very trusted relationship, I think, with a customer as a bank.
I hear you.
And I think that branding with the banks is really important because even though we might loathe the banks and nobody really likes them, we sort of at the same time we accept that they kind of know what they're doing to a certain extent.
Yeah. And all the and you look at all the marketing that like building societies do, like Halifax and Nationwide. It's all very touchy feely. We care. We know that you're feeling a bit skint, and we care.
Yeah.
Which of course they don't.
Yeah.
But that's their marketing.
Yeah.
That's their branding.
Whereas a TV service or bog roll or drinks or food or something else is less critical, isn't it?
So I totally take your point, and my only addition to that isn't to disagree with you, but just to say that on top of the very good points you make, you've got general brand inertia, which says if there was orange branded bog roll on the shelf at Sainsbury's, and it would even go with the Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's got an orange logo, so you'd think that'd be a natural fit, wouldn't you? Yeah. I'd be like, well, I'm not fucking buying that. I mean, and what's the worst that could happen? It's not going to set my arse on fire, is it? But
might.
I still
might put a 5G signal up your arse.
Instead of smoke.
Yeah, bloke smoke. So for various reasons, I think the broader issue we're talking about is attempts to diversify and why it's so difficult. And there are reasons to do with corporate and cultural inertia. There are reasons to do with branding inertia. There are reasons to do with core competence. And basically, the whole telecoms industry, for which this story to do with Orange is just the latest example, I think on the whole, in terms of value for shareholders, if no operator had ever tried to diversify ever, their shareholders would be better off on aggregate.
Probably.
If they just fucking sat there and made their peace of the fact that they're basically a sort of slightly Ponzi utility.
Yeah.
And that's that. Because I'm pretty sure that a net, you look at Orange, you look at BT, AT&T, you look at Vodafone 360, you look at all these things, Verizon bought AOL and Yahoo and all that silliness. If they'd all, I think it's got to be all a net negative for the shareholders of telcos.
The problem with the shareholders of telcos is that when 20 years, go back 20, a bit more than 20 years, late 90s, early 2000s, the telcos were perceived to be the companies that were quite high tech, that were very high tech and very sexy. And one of the reasons for that was 3G coming, was broadband and 3G coming along.
So this is like turn of the millennium.
And the absence of a Google or an Amazon or the other one, the Netflix.
Certainly in the form that they are now.
There was this huge vacuum there. And there was I remember working on the business plans in my former job for this stuff where they were saying, if you do this well, and you win this 3G license and you roll out these new services, the people, they were talking about all the kind of things. Some of the stuff was quite, looking back on it, giving credit to the people who put a lot of this together, was quite visionary, actually. They were talking about things like video conferencing and TV on your phone and all this stuff. And it's all happened, but it's not been driven by the telcos, unfortunately.
Yes.
And they were told that they could do it, and there was an opportunity for them to do it, and they tried to do it. And you mentioned walled gardens earlier on. They went about things in a... I'm not saying I'd have done it any better, by the way. I'm not saying I'd got it right, because it's not easy to do this stuff. No, it takes the disruptor to come along, and get it right. But
and that feeds into something I want to say. And then, unless you have any other stuff that you want to add on it, I'll move it on just in the name of time. Just being I always find it fascinating to imagine what it's like being at the top table when they come up with a new strategy. Because I suspect a lot of the time, and again, hindsight's 2020. I don't want to be too like, well, that was obviously a shit idea after it's failed.
Yeah.
That I just wonder what kind of information and cultural environment sometimes these decisions are made in. You can imagine them all sitting there. By definition, the people in there live in a sort of rarefied atmosphere. Because if you're at a top table of a FTSE 100 company, you're not living in a fucking council house in southeast London, are you?
Probably not.
So you're already in a sort of niche sort of demographic, and then you've got people around you. You've probably got a lot of the people who report into you. While they might not be sycophants, they're certainly not going to go, "You're talking shit, mate." So you're going to get some, at the very least, quite diluted dissent. And then you can get this sort of echo chambery thing, and then you've got the I think slightly perverse incentives of people who are senior exec, which is to be seen to be doing something strident and overt, like a big bit of M&A or a big strategic move. I don't think you get a big bonus, or you don't get invited to Davos or whatever just by keeping the ship on an even keel and not fucking anything up. You have to roll the dice every now and then.
Yeah.
And so there's all these, and I'd just love to be in the room when they go, all right, like with Orange on this one, all right, here we are. We're a former state monopoly telco. We're doing all right in France, much to Pierre's surprise. But how can we take it to the next level? And then someone goes, bonking. And they go, yeah, fuck it. Why not? Who says only SocGen or whatever can do banking?
Let's start a car.
Yeah. How about
Orange car?
I mean, I would respect them more if they got into like orange juice or something orangey.
Orangina,
yeah, Orangina. If they bought Orangina and just started having this, there'd be more brand synergy, more sort of intuitive brand synergy from orange to Orangina to orange juice to, isn't there a region in South France called Orange or something like that? And they just, I think it's like towards Côte d'Or or something like that. Anyway, but I'm being a bit facetious, but I just love to be in the room when they come up with these things, because sometimes you figure that they would just all get pissed and just go, let's give this a go.
I think that's a journalist's dream, isn't it, to be in a boardroom at times? Because if you sit hide in a cupboard during some of the boardroom conversations, you get massive scoops, wouldn't you, clearly? It's just like, go and lock yourself in a cupboard.
Can you imagine writing it up?
Yeah.
I mean, you wish sometimes they'd let you get in there and then anonymise it. Let's say there's 10 people in the boardroom.
Yeah.
You get to write out what was said, but you don't attribute any of it. So there's a degree of deniability.
Well, some of this stuff...
Let us do that, anyone. We'll do that. I promise you we won't give individual names.
Some of this stuff probably comes out in those sorts of leaks that you see to the likes of Bloomberg and Reuters, I suspect.
Yeah. But that won't be, that will be passed on. That won't be people sat in the room.
So they don't just leave the room and go, this was such a crazy idea, let me just tell the press.
Well, they probably go back to the room, they brief their divisional managers on what's happened, and then it eventually filters down.
Or they might do trial balloons. They might, like what you just said, they might go, if they got someone at Reuters or AP or whatever that they really trust, they might go, look, you didn't hear it from me, but we're thinking of getting into banking. And, I've spoken about these trial balloons before on the pod. It actually makes a lot of sense, because then Reuters goes off and writes up that, exclusive sources say Orange is thinking of getting into banking, but that it's not attributed to Orange or certainly not any individual. And then they find some clever way of gauging the public reaction when that exclusive comes out from Reuters or AP or Bloomberg.
Yeah, you look at what happens to the share price.
And then they suddenly think, hold on a sec, everyone thinks this is a shit idea. And it's a good way of dipping their toe and testing the water.
Or a movie that leaks a scene from like an animated character and they go, oh, that's horrible. And they go, oh, maybe we should go back.
Yeah,
right,
similar thing.
Yeah, there's all sorts of trouble. I actually think as a mechanism for a low-risk way of sort of exposing something to the public, engaging in initial response, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm happy to be used that way if anybody wants to use me.
Well, I mean, you look at like some of the stuff I've spoken about before with things like Twitter files. That the US security state uses, there's this is a complete tangent, I'll keep it short, but there's all sorts of stuff going on to do with Trump getting sued for holding on to classified documents when he shouldn't have, which it sounds like he's banged to rights on, by the way. But, one journalist I really respect, Glenn Greenwald, who I listen to his show he does on Rumble a lot, he points out that classified information is constantly being leaked to the press. In those sort of sources close to the matter who requested anonymity. That's nearly always someone in one of those alphabet security agencies or the government or the deep state or whatever. So there's that kind of leaking, and then there's Trump going, these are my boxes, get your fucking hands off.
I thought interesting, it's a bit of a tangent as well, but Patrick Donegan, who used to work for us on Heavy Reading, but now he's independent, put an interesting tweet up today, because you've probably seen it via I don't want to mention him again, so I'm not going to say the name, but you've probably seen this stuff on.
You mean someone who'll send us text messages saying what a great pod it is because we mentioned him?
Yeah, but
you know who you are.
You know you are. But the Huawei snooping in Denmark story that broke a few days ago about them sort of having
that's whittled it down as well, isn't it?
Putting pressure on TDC and everything. It's a really good story, but it's the same guy at Bloomberg who wrote the one a few years ago, if you remember, about Chinese surveillance sort of chips going into equipment that was being used in America. And Patrick Donegan put this interesting thing up saying, this would be a great story if it wasn't Bloomberg. The trouble for me with Bloomberg is that they're sort of used by US security agencies.
Totally.
Background sources, they rely on them heavily, and therefore, in my opinion, they're not a reliable source. I thought it was a really interesting comment, actually.
Well, and it's completely consistent with my observations. You know, they'll get a scoop, and it's a really interesting, juicy story, but then you think, what is the narrative it's basically supporting? The narrative it's basically supporting is consistent with the aims of the US state, i.e. China bad.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. We will we'll move on. In fact, this is a good moment. I think we both need another beer.
I definitely need one for this section.
Yeah. This is a bit in the weeds. You're going to be doing a lot of talking. I want to give a shout out to Jerry from Ericsson. Mm-hmm. Have you ever met Jerry from Ericsson?
No, but I've been liaising with her today
have you?
By email. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm feeling all left out.
Well, it's just something I'm asking for. It's not a news story.
Anyway, she recommended, she knows I like beer. I've met up with her a couple of times when she's come over to London. We've gone out and had a few beers. And she knows I like beer, and she knows we like pale ale. And she recommended this one. So I brought a couple in from home. So I bought like a box of 24, and it's this band called New Barnes, and they're Scottish.
Heavy metal band.
No, they're Scottish.
Well, they can still be heavy metal.
Well, they could be, but they're not a fucking beer, aren't they? There's
a band. I thought it said something to do with the band.
New Barn.
Oh, okay.
New Barn.
I heard that too, Ian.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Perhaps I said it. My bad. New Barnes, it's called. Maybe I said New Bands. Okay, my bad.
You went, there's this band.
Right, in that case.
What is it? What's a bar?
I'll listen back to this on Monday and I'll be like, oh shit, that was me just being an idiot.
It's a proof, right?
Anyway, it's Jerry recommended it, and I bought a 24-pack of them. They're not the cheapest. These are slightly bigger, 440ml ones. Probably comes to about £3 a tin.
Whoa.
But, yeah, whoa.
That's a lot.
But it's really decent. And
it's quite a commitment to have bought 24, though, right away.
Yeah, it's like 75 quid, I think, for 24.
Fuck.
Yeah, so that's about £3. So I brought...
Is it a Costco thing?
No, it's straight from them.
Oh, okay, right. Gotcha.
And so I brought a couple in. I brought in... My favourite one is this Supreme Pale Ale. I bought that for you. And I brought in this... They do one that they just call table beer. And it's called table beer because it's only 3%. And normally I'd be like, 3%, get the fuck away from me.
That's just about right, yeah.
Well... Actually, because I'm meeting some...
It's quite low.
I'm meeting some mates later. Yeah, his is 5%.
Below 3, you're like, okay, no. But 3 starts to get...
Below 3, it'd be like those beers we had in China, Ian. Remember?
Yeah, the 3 is nice for being able to drink a lot, obviously, and not...
Well, exactly, and that's the reason I brought this in for myself, because it's still quite drinkable. Doesn't taste too, like, watery. And I'm meeting some mates later, and they won't have been drinking, and I don't want to have too much of a head start.
I thought you were trying to take advantage of me.
You want to be warmed up already?
Well... One Supreme and you're anyone's, Ian. So anyway, let's crack these.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, Jezza. Good recommendation.
It's like a Beavertown's Nanobot, which I think it's 2.7 or 2.8, something like that.
Right.
Yeah,
what do you reckon, Ian?
It's nice.
What's crazy is that at 3%, it should be cheaper, though.
Leith reminds me of Train Spotting.
Yeah.
I've actually been to Leith. It's...
Actually, it's funny you mentioned Train Spotting because Jerry's really into her books.
Right.
And she even read my book and was very kind about it. Although she said it did her head in a bit at first, which I took as a compliment.
Yeah.
And then I said to her, I can't remember why, but I said, why don't you read Train Spotting, which is based in Leith, I believe.
It is.
And she read that recently. And she's like... She lives in Sweden and from Singapore originally. Okay. And if you read Train Spotting, so it's written in like phonetic.
Vernacular, yeah.
And so that was doing her head in as well.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time to get you. I can imagine that would be the case.
But then once you get into it, you find yourself like talking like...
How do they spell light, for example? Like,
well, it's phonetic, like Scott says. So you read it as you would pronounce it.
The one that really jumped out at me about how they wrote it is bottle. Bottle, they wrote Boatil.
Oh,
bottle. Yeah. And so once you get into that phonetic way of writing, then you start talking jock.
Yeah.
Neil McRae.
Yeah, and so anyway, there's a tangent there. But cheers, Jerry. That was a good recommendation, and I may well go back there. And they give you, this was called the Hoppy selection. There's about 5 or 6 different ones, and they're all decent.
Did you guys ever bother with the second movie?
I did, and I thought it was pretty good.
Okay.
T20. It's not as good as the first one, obviously, but it's quite good. Yeah. I was recommended it by Ray LeMaitre.
Okay.
Because he obviously liked the first one, and I think he went to see the second one at the cinema, and he said, yeah, it's good, but it's obviously not as good as the first. But yeah, it's a good film.
I went to a press conference once with Danny Boyle.
Right. He directed the second one as well, Danny Boyle, which is a good sign.
Yeah.
Not to have a different director, but it's if you've not watched it, you should watch it. It's good. I think it's based very loosely on another Irving Welsh book, but
yeah, because it's not
they
really
changed. So Trainspotting is quite faithful to the book, whereas T20's quite different from the successive book that the sequel to Trainspotting, the name of which I can't remember, and I've not read it either, but apparently it's quite different.
Yeah, I think I read the one after. There's certainly, Trainspotting's definitely the best of his output that I've read.
Well, I liked quite a lot of his early ones. Like he did a short story collection called Marabou Stalk Nightmares. I think it's really, really good. Maybe that isn't a short story collection, but he did some really good early stuff. And then I think he sort of went off the boil a bit for me. But
in my early years, I adapted one of his short stories in a music video.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Gee.
It's cool. When a kid he shoots with his grandmother.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, like you know, I don't know if you ever attempted to write fiction, but when I was writing my book, you definitely get some license from other fiction that you've read.
Yeah.
Like some of the bits where I went quite into the weeds about some quite technical stuff, I got license from things like 1984, where there's bits of 1984 where, you know, there's no dialogue, there's no action, there's just these concepts that he's coming out with.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I took license from Irving Welsh from is like I've got that one character who speaks in a sort of, you know what I mean, sort of London-y way.
Yeah.
I took that.
I think quite a lot of people have done that now. There's a book called The Seven Killings of, what's it called? There's a Jamaican author who wrote a book about the sort of Bob Marley a sort of episode in Jamaica, the crime that was sort of around it. It won the Booker Prize, but I couldn't get on with it at all. I found the phonetic in that just did my head. I couldn't.
You got to be careful.
You were so, but from someone from that country, perhaps they'd find it easier. And because we're quite close to Scotland, and you hear Scottish people all the time, it wasn't that hard for me to sort of read it and get what Irving Welsh was getting at. But doing the Jamaican,
in fact, I remember
really hard.
I remember making the decision not to do phonetic, even with my character who's really overtly Londony. You know, like you say a Londoner, we say, you know what I mean. You can imagine how you could write, you know what I mean, phonetically.
Yeah.
But in the end, I just decided to write, you know what I mean, because the phonetics would it just would have been a mess.
Totally.
And then once you open that fucking Pandora's box, you know, what else do you do phonetically?
Yeah.
But I thought it was very brave of him to do that, and I thought it worked in that book.
well in that book, yeah. We should talk about telecom stuff.
We should talk about telecom stuff. So now we've had that bit of light relief, let's get back into the weeds.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to sort of largely pass the ball to you. I'll tee it up briefly because I did write this up, but I wrote it up in a fairly short amount of time yesterday evening. And so this is Nokia and Red Hat. So Nokia, we all know what Nokia is. Red Hat is a sort of tech company. They're best known for making enterprise-grade open source software, and they were bought by IBM a few years ago. But they seem to have done a good job of letting Red Hat keep doing its Red Hat.
Well, they do
thing.
Cloud infrastructure software. They're in the same game as VMware and.
Yeah, well, which is definitely the more relevant way of framing it to this story.
Yeah.
And it just sort of snuck out this thing yesterday that they've got this partnership. And initially I thought it's just one of those things where, they've decided to sort of help each other out. But it seems a bit bigger than that, a bit more of a strategic partnership, which, you know, and I won't steal your thunder too much, which even involves some transfer of personnel from one to the other.
Yeah.
And it's all to do with, as you were saying, this sort of cloud stuff. So, and I just framed it as Nokia and Red Hat announced cloud strategic partnership. So I'll leave it at that because while we both wrote it up, you actually listened in on the special call. So you know a lot more about it than I do, and you were explaining it to me beforehand, and I must admit, sometimes this stuff gets so abstract that I sort of struggle to fully get my head around it. So over to you. pretend I'm a complete idiot, which would be quite easy for you to do. I'll try.
I mean, it's quite, I suppose it's fairly complicated, but you can simplify. So you run your telecom software on a cloud infrastructure platform, yeah? And there are lots of these around. I mean, this is one of the complaints the telcos have had for a few years. It's been coming up a lot about these silos.
So when you say cloud infrastructure platform, do you mean something like AWS or Azure?
Well, those are the public clouds. You can use these within those. You can use those. You can combine those. You can use
or you can have Nokia's one.
This is like Kubernetes, and OpenStack. You have your
containers and all that.
The system that manages the software.
Yeah, see, that's where it all gets abstract. It really does start.
The system that manages the software. Think of it as maybe like an operating system. Try and think about it in that way, maybe. But so you maybe that's the best way to try to think about it. But you sit your applications on that, and then what's tended to happen with, this deal very much concerns core network applications that Nokia develops and sells to telcos. Things like the Evolved Packet Core and Home Location Register and all these little functions that you've got that form part of the core network stack that you sell to someone like BT or whoever it might be.
Normally it's one sort of effectively monolith.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Right. So you can buy them from different people, but apparently, and I didn't actually know this before I sort of started writing about this thing yesterday even, apparently people tend to just get them from one, all from the same
You can
company,
see the temptation. It's almost back to what we were talking about earlier about bundling a bunch of stuff together.
It is, and apparently it just becomes more complicated to use different vendors. It's interesting, it's a little bit of a different trend.
Because with different vendors, this is purely in a software setting, so that's where the comparisons of what we were talking about earlier don't apply. But with different software vendors, you have to be sure that they're going to play nice with each other.
Yeah, well, I think it's different. In things like business support systems and operational support systems, you get these two things: best of suite and best of breed. Best of suite and best of breed. So best of suite is you take all the different applications from one vendor. Yeah, because overall it's the best thing you can get in the market compared with the overall stuff that you would get from another company. Whereas best of breed is dipping in and looking at each separate application and going, the best person in that area is Mavenir, the best person in that area is Nokia, the best person in that area is Ericsson. That's best of breed. But so there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Best of suite, there's that whole, I don't like the expression very much, but that one throat to choke,
There's a lot of unfortunate little metaphors that come up in corporate speak.
But actually, it sums it up quite well. People know what you mean when you say that. You go to this company and you complain about it, but maybe some things aren't quite as good as you could get if you went elsewhere. You go elsewhere, you get a range of things that are really, really good, but you've got to make them all play together nicely, etc., etc. But apparently in the core network applications area, people have tended in 4G and 5G to go and get them all from the same company. And then what's happened also is so people put it on their own, the platform, if we call it an OS or whatever, they put it on their own. So Nokia has these things that are kind of equivalent to what someone like Red Hat would do. It has its own kind of Kubernetes distribution and its own OpenStack distribution that it uses to support these applications. And you sell that to the operator. The trouble for the operator is it's getting that with that Kubernetes or OpenStack thing underneath it to support it. But it's got a bunch of those in the mix because it's doing the same thing with BSS and OSS from someone else, and it's got other network and IT applications. The core network applications in mobile is only one part of what an operator has to manage across its whole network and IT portfolio. So if you've got all these different platforms that you're supporting these applications on, you've basically got a bunch of vertical silos supporting all the range of applications that you need across the network. Yeah. So you get that sort of idea.
Yeah.
Whereas if you went with someone like the ideal is to have one layer, basically, one sort of operating system, let's say, one Kubernetes distribution that would support all these different things.
Right.
So
why would that be better?
Rather than having lots of different things that are incompatible, just to have one platform.
So it's the smoothness.
Well, to think about it from a cost perspective for a start.
Yeah. So that's that's the bundling concept. But is there a technological reason in terms of the interoperability?
Well, those applications would only work like I don't necessarily know if like your core network applications would have to interface with some of the other applications that you're using in your overall sort of portfolio, but it's still a lot more economical and efficient to put it all on one underlying layer rather than to have lots and lots of different
because then you get
stacks.
Duplication.
And also the other thing is that you want the freedom to just it's think of what you're buying. If you go out there and I want to buy some Nokia applications and put them on my on my system and run it, I have to buy their Kubernetes thing as well to do that. And I've already got a bunch of those in my estate, and you just add in complexity and so you get these vertical silos basically in the system that people have been complaining about. There's a push to have some more efficient, a horizontal layer. I think the way the food analogy that gets used is it's like going from spaghetti to lasagna, isn't it? Kind of thing,
Right.
That's the sort
I haven't heard that
analogy.
one before.
That gets thrown up all the time.
God, for some reason, I've never heard it because I like a simile to simplify these things.
That's the food analogy.
Lasagna. Obviously, you can picture the layers, the horizontal layers, where spaghetti is all over the shop.
What's happened in this case is that Nokia's basically given up doing, it seems, its own sort of Kubernetes OpenStack stuff. It's decided that it's going to move that the stuff, that area of its activities into Red Hat. So they've got 350 people that are actually going to move across from Nokia to Red Hat to join Red Hat's team and kind of support their development of their own. I can't remember what they call it. I think the OpenShift is their Kubernetes one, and they have another one that's like an OpenStack system. And that will allow Nokia just to focus on doing the applications.
Red Hat OpenStack platform and Red Hat OpenShift.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. So that will allow Nokia to just focus on doing the application stuff, and then Red Hat does the sort of underlying platform, the cloud infrastructure platform that supports those applications. And then I guess if you're an operator that, if you're going along with the logic of what Nokia was saying on the call, you have a common layer that can run other things as well, that could run other stuff.
And also another advantage is that Red Hat presumably plays nice across all the public cloud.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the reasons perhaps for using one of these companies like Wind River and Red Hat and VMware is that they have their systems designed to actually run them within the public cloud as well. So you can put it on, you can use it on AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure and take advantage of some of the features and services that they've got to offer and have a sort of ability to. If you just go in with them directly, I think, if you were just to go all in with AWS, which is what someone like Dish has done, for instance, I think, there's a fear about tying yourself too closely to them, and then it becomes hard.
Speak about a lot on this pod.
Becomes hard to sort of move out of that environment, and you take advantage of their services in a way that makes it quite hard to move. Whereas if you have this sort of, it gets called an abstraction layer, I think, in the industry. You have Red Hat there or Wind River. It can be Wind River or VMware as a kind of abstraction layer. It becomes supposedly easier to sort of port that stuff if you wanted to, and that's a part of this. That did come up in the call yesterday that they were sort of keen to point that out. I think the issue that I would have with it is, what if a customer of Nokia doesn't want to use Red Hat? Yeah, let's say.
Is there a reason why they wouldn't want to?
Well, in the same way you might not want to use Ericsson.
Obviously, there are reasons why you wouldn't want to do anything.
There's all sorts of reasons why.
But I'm just wondering if there are any specifics that spring to mind.
I mean, Red Hat's reputation is really good. I'm not gonna. I don't.
But they just might have some kind of.
But you still might have a preference.
Really strong relationship.
You might have let's say you were already using Wind River. Okay, let's say you already had Wind River there, and you're using them for a load of other things, and you don't want to end your relationship with Wind River.
Yeah,
and because you've had a really good relationship with them for a really long time, and you're thinking of going even more all in with them, but you want to get some of these Nokia core network applications. and but you don't really want to engage Red Hat, because if you do that, all of a sudden you don't have one common layer anymore, do you? Unless you get rid of Wind River, you've got two layers.
Yes, and so that comes to what I think is an interesting part of this. As I framed it at the start, it's more than just a relationship. It's a strategic partnership.
Totally, yeah.
Where Nokia is basically saying, for the foreseeable future, we're going to be all in with Red Hat on this stuff.
They've basically picked a winner.
Yeah.
Nokia has basically picked he said on the call, so it's Fran Heeren, who's in the Nokia sort of technical team, basically complained about the profusion of platforms at the moment, which is an argument the telcos have come out with. No one would dispute that. But their answer to that is basically to say they're not going to work on doing that because their platform was only ever really geared up for supporting Nokia's core network applications, yeah? So the best thing for them to do, if they're going to go all in with a system that they think could become a sort of de facto standard for supporting everything, is to choose Red Hat, yeah? That's essentially what they've done. Because if you take it to its logical conclusion, the only way his argument really justifies itself is if a company comes along, an operator comes along and goes, I'm going to go and buy Nokia's core network applications, and therefore I'm going to put everything else that needs hosting on a cloud infrastructure platform on Red Hat as well. Because if you don't do that and you keep other cloud infrastructure platforms in the mix to support other applications, then you don't have one common layer anymore. You've got multiple layers in the mix. So, and that would be that's my pushback to the whole thing is, now they do say, by the way, that if you're a customer and you don't want to use Red Hat, they'll carry on supporting you. But it seems to be the case that
and the transitions can be very gradual.
And there's a transition that's gradual, but the issue is, they were saying they're basically saying there's two models. There's the model where people come along and only buy one or two applications and try and have a core where they're taking applications from lots of people, the best of breed approach. And in those instances, it's going to be much harder, I think, anyway, for them to push this approach that they've got, because you might be taking some Ericsson stuff there as well as some Mavenir stuff. And unless those companies have the same kind of cozy arrangement with Red Hat that Nokia does, it's much harder to sort of force an operator to go with a particular cloud infrastructure platform, isn't it? Because there's other people in the mix. It just becomes a much more difficult thing to do anyway.
It's an interesting dynamic with these kind of tie-ups. It's funny, you've mentioned Wind River several times, and we wrote a story.
Well, there's only really three. That's the thing.
Right, okay,
I mean, we talk about consolidated markets that don't have much competition.
I actually didn't realise it was that consolidated.
Those are the three that always get cited, and there aren't really...
I've always thought of Wind River as more of like an embedded software. Like for
Wind River is is a competitor to Red Hat and VMware. It's a direct competitor. They will all have things that they are slightly better at doing, I'm sure, and there's differences. Like for a start, Red Hat is very much in the open source game, whereas I think VMware there's more sort of proprietary stuff there. VMware gets tarnished a bit with the brush that it's old school virtualization as opposed to cloudification.
Right.
Don't ask me to explain the difference between that, because that really starts to get confusing. But I think the main difference is with you're talking about the difference between using like virtualization. You have a hypervisor in there, which is like a common operating system to support everything. Whereas I think with cloudification, it's more about using containers, where each discrete software element has its own operating system built into it. But that's getting into territory that I find hard to...
And again, I'm totally out of my depth on this stuff, but part of the thing, the little I understand or thought I understood about containers is, while they as the name implies, might be defined in a certain specific way, they're supposed to all play nice in the broader sort of operating system or abstraction layer or whatever, these various containers.
The containers contain everything it needs to function on a sort of standalone basis, I think.
But then it also needs to be able to play nice with the rest of the world. Anyway, fuck it.
Well,
I'm probably already screwing this up.
But,
one of the things... One of the reasons I mentioned Wind River is I wrote a quick thing earlier on this week about how Samsung and Wind River are teaming up over what they call the software-defined vehicle. And I won't get into that. It's not a particularly big story by itself. And this is one of the reasons why I have Wind River down more as a sort of embedded software specialist, which could be also true. both things can be true. What you said about them and what I said about them can both be true at the same time.
They've just been bought by Aptiva, isn't it? Aptiv or whatever.
Well, I know they were bought by Intel. Were they bought off
that's
Intel?
That's a long time ago. So
they weren't independent. Now they've been bought again. Oh, I didn't know that.
The deal was a long time ago, but it's just cleared like 2 weeks ago or something. Aptiv, which is actually mainly the cars game.
Oh, there we are.
Software for cars. But,
so there we are.
Yeah.
So now Samsung's had a sort of similar level of intimacy with them. Anyway, the only reason I bring it up is...
So Wind River, for instance, is the company that's supporting vRAN for Vodafone UK in its swap out.
Okay.
That's Wind River. They're pretty much doing what Nokia's talking about Red Hat doing in this instance, except it's the core rather than the RAM.
Right. Yeah, and so I think what I'm trying to get at, and this could be a false sort of equivalence, but when you get these partnerships going on, and in a sec, I will ask you to see if you can tell me why you think Nokia's done this, i.e. what was broken that it thinks this fixes. But, as you've already intimated, Nokia's picked a winner, picked a team. And then, Samsung's picked a team with Wind River on the software-defined vehicle, and I'm sure there's lots of upsides for it. But again, that could create some sort of tensions with other vehicle manufacturers, or... I think this thing just concerns Android, so I don't know if it says anything.
The Wind River car stuff, I don't really understand the overlap.
No, but I just bring it up because we're talking about Wind River, and what I'm talking about more broadly is when two big companies decide to have a technology strategic partnership, there can be pros and cons. That's the only reason I make that equivalent.
Yeah,
anyway.
I mean, don't ask me about the active Wind River thing, because that's a bit weird to me, that ownership model. But certainly the Nokia and... it might be one of those things where they just bought something that's got very little to do with what their mainstream thing is. I just haven't looked into it enough. But Nokia, the reason they've done it, I suspect, is because they know that operators are grumbling about it.
What are they grumbling about?
Vertical silos. And they were basically one of the companies that had a vertical silo, with the stuff that they're doing.
Right.
So they've decided the solution to this is to go all in with... Red Hat as a company that can offer you a common layer to do everything.
So what's not to like then?
The what's not to like is that I wonder if that's the solution that operators want. I wonder if they want a point of dependency that is a bit of IBM.
Yes.
As opposed to doing something like initiatives like Silver, which seems to be an effort, a European-led telco effort to have standards and some kind of way around this where, companies comply with certain requirements, so that makes it easier to maybe move things around from one platform to another, and you don't have lock-in, and you have more sort of the kind of stuff that the O-RAN Alliance is doing to a certain extent. It just makes it a bit easier to move things between platforms because you have to comply with certain rules that they set,
and obviously,
as opposed to having a layer that's owned by one private sector company.
Yeah, this is a telecoms podcast, and so we completely understand the value of global standards that are not owned by anyone.
Yeah,
because that's what fucking 4G, 5G, etc. is. And if you can make it work, then it's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah,
but it doesn't. There are not too many other equivalents of 3GPP or whoever it is that supervises these things that seem to work as well as it does.
No, I mean, Silver's not really a standards group, and actually the O-RAN Alliance isn't really a standards group either.
No.
That's one of the criticisms of them. Their initiatives.
Get that standards and specifications thing mixed up as well.
And Silver's, I don't know what the status of it is. It's also very young, and I remember asking Red Hat about this at Mobile World Congress this year, and they didn't really seem to have very much involvement in it. And I always thought one of the problems with it is if you don't get those companies involved and you don't get the public clouds involved as well, then where's it going to go? And I don't think this is a very good thing for Silver. It doesn't sound like it is to me, because it just doesn't sound like it's what that group's trying to push. And this is where I'd be slightly confused, admit to being maybe slightly confused, is Nokia would obviously have gone out there, we talked about this before coming on, and asked customers what they thought. They don't do these things without having some kind of customer feedback. It wasn't just like
my paradigm of them getting pissed in the boardroom. Fuck it.
So they would obviously have gone out and spoken to people and probably got good feedback on doing this. And yet the implication is you're only going to get the full benefits of doing something like this, and you're only going to avoid having vertical silos if you agree that if you're a Nokia customer, everything else goes onto Red Hat as well.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that and you keep other people in the mix to support other applications and functions that you've got, you've still got silos. You know. Now maybe you haven't got as many silos. Maybe because things are geared to work. Those companies are used to supporting. You know, they don't just work with Nokia, clearly, yeah? So they're used to working with other companies in the applications game, whether they're on the core network side or whether they're on the BSS and OSS side or whatever it might be. So, but it still implies that everybody who's a sort of Nokia core network client is going to go along with a kind of Red Hat model in the future.
Yeah.
And get other players that would be doing that sort of thing out of the mix and put it all on Red Hat. And great. Then you can take advantage of AWS and Google and Microsoft, or you can just run it in a private cloud setting if you want, rather than using the public clouds. You've got that kind of portability. Brilliant. I buy that. But at the end of the day, then you've still got one single point of dependency.
Yeah.
Which is Red Hat.
Which, as you say, is something that operators are increasingly stressed about. And
that's perhaps more of a concern, I think, than all this stuff about, there's only one company, there's only two companies selling radio access network equipment.
And so given that already operators have so little choice, they've basically got, in anywhere that's affiliated to the US, for a lot of operators, for most of their telco stuff, they're reliant on either Ericsson or Nokia.
Yeah.
And then a long tail Samsung Open RAN types and that sort of thing. Is it possible for you to make any comment on how this affects the competitive landscape between Nokia and Ericsson, a move like this?
Well, I know I didn't think about that aspect of it that much, but I remember the Omdia research note that they put out around about the same time I was writing my thing was it sort of puts the pressure on Ericsson to do something similar, they were saying.
So this feels like Nokia taking the initiative.
Yeah, I mean, the way Omdia sort of framed it was that Ericsson's kind of behind the curve then, because they're still sort of doing things in the old Nokia way of having these their own sort of cloud infrastructure platforms, their own kind of Kubernetes distribution and OpenStack, and maybe they need to sort of get with the game. But you think where could that lead? Presumably this is really interesting, actually, thinking about this. Does this deal with Red Hat, and this wasn't asked because it's only just occurred to me now, but does this deal with Red Hat and Nokia preclude Red Hat from doing the same thing with Ericsson?
Yes, good point.
And if they did do the same thing with Ericsson, is that a favourable thing for the market? Because then all of a sudden you've got two of the big core network companies in the world going with Red Hat as their this is the way it's been described, by the way, the wording that was used in the call, and I think maybe even the primary infrastructure partner. In other words, all of our focus and energy is going to go on to gearing our stuff up to work on that platform from now on, and anything else is a bit of a hassle, frankly. Which is reading between the lines, more or less what Fran Heron at Nokia was saying. There's too many of these platforms, he said. We need to focus on one of them, essentially. So if Ericsson did the same thing, well, to me that's even more worrying. Yeah, and then all of a sudden Red Hat becomes this all-powerful thing in the market.
And I take your point there. And then what if Ericsson goes, oh shit, and then they go chatting to Wind River or VMware, and then they come up with an equivalent thing with one of those?
So then the problem with that is that then you're starting to get these strategic alliances forming. And I know they were very resistant to the idea of it being described as lock-in, but you're basically sort of shepherding your telco customers towards one thing, aren't you? You go with Ericsson, that means using Wind River as your cloud infrastructure partner. You go with Nokia, that means using Red Hat as your cloud infrastructure partner. This to me, I mean, we've paid attention to this, what telcos have been saying for the last few years at trade shows and in interviews. They've not been saying things like that.
No.
They've been saying they want the freedom to be able to mix and match and use this.
Or while at the same time, I seem to remember Neil McRae talking in the past, going, "It's a pain in the arse to have too many."
He has, but I think he would say, yeah, all right, you want to go with one or two, but you still want to have the option. You certainly don't want to have to go with this company. That means, you're using this company as well.
Yeah, you don't want to have the choice made for you.
I mean, I take issue with some of the stuff that comes out on the openness front. I think it can go too far.
Yeah.
But to go along with, these are important players in the mix, by the way. This isn't the same as saying, a little bit of our RAN software is going to be done on this silicon, which I kind of write about all the time. And to me, that's less of an issue than saying the whole of the applications are going onto this platform, this supporting platform. And by the way, that's what's happening. And they're two separate companies, but like it or not, because if you don't want to do it that way, it's going to be a lot harder for you, basically. That's kind of what the message is. So a deal between Ericsson and, as I say, if Red Hat, if it cuts Red Hat out from, that would have been a great question to ask if I'd thought about this more thoroughly now and if you prompted me to. I mean, it was actually an incredibly short call anyway. It wasn't. I mean, I'm going to provide some feedback to Red Hat if they listen, because maybe some of them will. But it wasn't set up in a very good way, that call. It was half an hour, and I don't want them to go on for an hour and a half, but I think half an hour when there's some preamble where the executives are talking at the start.
So how much Q&A time was there?
There was about 15 to 20 minutes. I mean, my second question didn't get asked.
Right. And there were quite a lot of hacks on the call.
I didn't see how many hacks on the call because it was on a weird platform that they were using. It was their own Red Hat.
Like
so it wasn't on Zoom.
Thing.
No, it wasn't on Zoom or Teams.
Proprietary
it was on their own
Zoomy
thing.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to know how to use. And you didn't have that option. I don't like typing questions in and then a person asked a question on your behalf. And they didn't even say who was asking the questions. So they didn't even say, this is Ian from Light Reading's got this question. It was just, we've got a question on this. It's like a webinar almost, how a webinar's done.
Because no one likes you, so they wouldn't.
Well, I don't care if they don't like me, that's fine. But I like the ones where you raise your hand. Yeah. And then you unmute yourself and you say, this is Ian like
on quarterly calls. Yeah.
So feedback to Red Hat. It was a shit call.
Shit platform.
Shit platform. It was a shit platform. It was a shit way for that to be done. It wasn't very good. Actually, it really wasn't. Right.
Considering you're supposed to be such a whizzy tech company, you could do better.
It wasn't just the tech platform. It was the duration, and it was not allowing the people to actually speak, to actually ask the question and say who they were, rather than actually have to type in questions.
Well, that comes into the broader thing that I've felt for years, where a lot of things that involve journalists don't seem to be designed with the journalist first in mind.
Well, because you don't get asked. They don't say, how would you like to do this? Would you like to do it on a Zoom?
Here it is.
Put your hand up. Or
they want you on the call so that they can tick that box and say, we got some hacks on the motherfucking call. Yeah. But then they don't give you a good journalist user experience.
But now that you've asked it, I'm going to go and, because they still haven't answered. This is the other thing they haven't done. They said the questions that we got asked that we couldn't answer on the call, we'll come back and ask those questions. So the question that I didn't get answered was, and I think we talked about this before we were coming on, when you're developing these core network applications, your whizzy little VEPC and all these other things that you do, and you want to run it on Red Hat, is what you're doing to run on Red Hat very different from what you're doing to run on Wind River?
Yeah.
Or another provider? Do you have to tailor it? Do you have to tweak it? In other words, do you have to have sort of two sets of software? Which is quite important, yeah? Because I suspect it is different, because otherwise they wouldn't be complaining about having to support multiple platforms. Why would it be an issue if you could just put the same piece of software on anything, yeah? So there's obviously some kind of adaptation.
In an ideal cloud world, everything is totally frictionlessly interchangeable.
And the guy's not going to be complaining about profusion of platforms if it was that easy, is he? So I suspect that it's not that easy. And therefore, we will support other customers. They've lost 350 people now to Red Hat. Those people have gone. That's not going to make it any easier, let's be honest, to go and support other platforms.
No, that strikes me as the most, short of an exchange of funds, the most sort of tangible commitment. They're saying 350 of our boffins are going to go over to that.
And it's people in R&D and product development. Yeah. So they've lost those. So that was a question that didn't get answered. And the other question I want to ask them is the one that you've just asked, is prompted me to think about, is what does it mean if Red Hat wanted to do exactly the same thing with Ericsson, could it? Or could it not because of the terms of this agreement?
Indeed.
And if it couldn't, that only leaves Ericsson really with 2 other options in the market. And then the prospect of it doing a deal with them, actually, I think slightly worrying. I think in a way of this sort of these sort of allegiances forming,
creating an increasing ramification, and
so
presumably
there's all sorts of implications in this story.
I think again, I could be barking up the wrong tree, but we've spoken in the past, and this certainly came up. I remember quoting it where Scott Petty, who we still hope, although it's gone a bit quiet to get on this pod one of these days, who's the overall CTO for Vodafone, is that right? I was at a thing and you weren't there, and I asked a question, although very much inspired by conversations with you on this pod and otherwise, although sometimes when we get at the pub we do talk about other shit, we don't just talk about telecoms the whole time. And this is the public cloud was coming out, and I was like, how easy is it to move from one to another, like from AWS to Azure or whatever? And he said something along the lines of it's a pain in the arse. Yeah. And this seems to set up another of those things where it's increasing the friction of moving between one and another, and I'm sure, just like with public cloud, there are lots of advantages. If you go all in AWS like Dish has done, I'm sure they're getting all kinds of advantages and efficiencies and flexibilities within that ecosystem. Yeah. But if one day they go, no, bollocks, Azure time, it is a massive pain in the arse.
Totally, and this all this is doing really is, and I think we've talked about it. James Crawshaw's made this point before very well, and Ros Roseborough, both of them are Omdia analysts, is that you're moving the point of dependency from Azure to Red Hat. Right. So it's all very well saying, oh, that's the abstraction layer that allows us to go between the clouds. Now, I can understand why that might be appealing in a certain way, because there's probably things that you get when you go into AWS that you don't get when you're with Google Cloud, and that you don't get with Microsoft Azure.
It'll all have their pros and cons.
And you can you can dip in and out and take advantage of all three. But you're still shifting the point of dependency to another company, and I don't know if it's a solvable problem. I got a really, really good quote from Ros, actually, when I was in Austin, and I was talking to her about this issue, and I put it into the story I wrote yesterday as a sort of comment on the problem that exists here. So I'll read it out.
Yeah, and then we'll move on after that, if that's all right.
But she said, at some point in that stack, there's going to be a dependency. If you want to have something consistent, something must be a common factor. It's going to be VMware or Red Hat, or it's going to be AWS, or it's going to be Microsoft services. Something must be the same. Right. Now, this is what I think the operators ideally would like, that thing that's the same not to be somehow done in a standardized way. Maybe it's a tool that you can use that nobody has ownership of. Yeah, I would think.
That's back to what I was going when I was going on about 3GPP earlier.
Yeah, totally. Some kind of standardized way of overcoming that problem, as opposed to having a bit of IBM that's the dependency. But it's not an easy thing to think your way out of. I don't know. And I think maybe Nokia's just come to that conclusion as well. And they've thought, well, Red Hat's the best that we see in the market. And, we see operators wanting to have a common layer, and we think this makes sense. They're not on the verge of going out of business, by the way, Red Hat. They're actually doing very well.
Especially not being owned by IBM.
From what I can see.
IBM's been around for about 100 fucking years.
I think they're doing a lot better than the bigger company, from what I can see. If you look at the results, but
IBM, the acronym stands for International Business Machines. That gives you some sense of how old that company is.
They've got about 250,000 employees still, I think, IBM, by the way. They're like one of the most heavily staffed of all the IT.
I mean, IBM was like the hot tech company of the 70s with mainframes and computers that ran on those fucking tape spools and shit like that. Yep. And the fact that they're still around and have managed to sort of...
I was going to drink that bit of ice, and then I thought...
a bit of ice pooling at the top of his tin. And they managed to redefine themselves as whatever they are now. I'm not even sure if I could describe what they are now, other than the broad brush tech company.
I don't think they could either.
But yeah, fair play to them. Anyway, so moving on... I'm going to take the lead on this one. A few things that I'm aggregating. I'm probably going to call because I'm the one who writes the description and the headline for the pod. I'll probably just call it politics, which might put people off because I think, oh, fucking hell, is he going to go on about the Tories or the EU or Donald Trump or something? And they all come in, but this is obviously politics as it affects our core subject matter of tech and telecoms. The lead is a story I wrote today just before I got on the train to come in for this pod. And my headline was UK Digital Exclusion Report is vague and superficial. And so there's a committee in Parliament that's come out with this report saying that there's basically they talk about digital exclusion, and what they mean by that is people who
digital exclusion.
People who either don't have an internet connection or are just fucking a bit clueless when it comes to tech.
Oh, those lucky people.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Dream of being in that digital exclusion.
Yeah, well, quite.
Can you sign up for it?
Yeah, there's all those people who like get feature phones and all that. And it just struck me, and there's a few other things, a few other little tangents I want to go on from that, but this is the starting point. This is the foothold. And yeah, and the reason I said it was vague and superficial is they came out with this report and go, well, there's too many people digitally excluded, we've got to fucking do something about it. But then you go, all right, fair enough. But then what does digitally excluded mean? And they don't really define it very well. And, one example, and I even took screenshots. What?
They never do these.
No, exactly.
It's all hazy words.
Well, it's all very political. This is why I call this politics, this segment. So there's one example. In the press release, they said 7 million households have no broadband or internet access. Think about that number. Do you think that's likely? 7 million?
Very, very
How many
unlikely.
households do you think there are in the UK?
I've seen BT's numbers because I look at them when their earnings releases come out, and there aren't 7 million households that don't have broadband or internet.
Just from BT's numbers.
Yeah.
So that's bollocks. And then in the full report, so that's just the press release, which has got like the executive summary.
I think the number of households in the UK is probably something like 27, 28 million.
Yeah, so they're saying a quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, fuck off.
Yeah. Sorry, government, you're talking shit and lying as usual.
You're talking shit, son.
We know all about government lying.
No, but I think it might have been a typo, because then you go to the full report, which I bet a lot of journalists didn't do. I bet they just wrote out the press release. And I'm not saying I'm the most conscientious journalist, like compared to you, where you sit in on these calls and all that, which I don't do a lot of the time. But what I do try and do is, if I see something and I'm not sure about it, then I'll try and drill down and go, okay, you sure? And then when you go to the full report, and I don't know if I'm missing something, but they seem to be saying that for that exact same figure, i.e. households with no broadband or mobile internet connection, is 1.7 million, not 7 million. So it makes me wonder whether it's just a really rudimentary typo.
It's a pretty
big one. An order of magnitude of about 5, isn't it?
Can't you write to somebody in the press office and go, hang on?
Well, I could have, again, if I was...
0.7.
Yeah, it's actually 7 people. It makes
me want to pursue them, because
7 people ain't got no phone. So I've been listening to a lot of Russell Brand recently, and some of his ungrammatical, the way he speaks makes me laugh. So 7 people ain't got no internet. And, 1.7 million, that's still quite high. And they say that's 6%, which I'm not even sure about that. They're saying 1.7 million households is 6% of, what did you say, 28 million total number of households?
28 million households in the UK.
Yeah, I guess 2.8 would be 10%. Yeah, so that is 6%. So that seems a bit more plausible, that 6% of households don't, although I actually find it hard to believe that anyone doesn't have a smartphone, or any household doesn't have a smartphone.
I find it hard to believe that people don't have at least one or the other.
I mean, smart, like my neighbors, I have neighbors on one side, they're both like, I don't know, if I had to guess, late 70s, 80s. Yeah. I don't think they have a phone. I don't know if it's a smartphone.
They've got some Doro.
No. One of them is on WhatsApp. So there you go. Actually, yeah.
One's on WhatsApp. Yeah. Even I'm not on WhatsApp. I don't even understand it.
Well, so that comes to the broader narrative, which I don't think was very well supported by the underlying data, about how loads of people are digitally excluded, by which they mean they haven't got a fucking Scooby about digital stuff. Whereas Pierre's, I know this is just anecdotal, but Pierre's 70-year-old neighbours are still on WhatsApp. But that counts as some degree of digital literacy, doesn't it?
I mean, I sort of view my parents as the average of what people are like at that age.
And your parents are in their 70s,
are they? My dad's 76 and my mum's a little bit older. So they took ages to get a broadband thing sorted out, admittedly, as late adopters do, but they now have, I think their connection's faster than ours is.
Yeah.
They watch their TV through like streaming platforms.
They get there.
My mum has like half a gig.
They book hotels on, they book hotels
Booking.com
on
or whatever.
Booking.com and stuff. So
they ride Uber
I
bikes.
think they're very typical of the
whizzing around on Lime
population.
bikes.
So I don't. I mean, there's only so much hand holding and nanny stating you can do.
Exactly.
With this
And
stuff.
It's funny because back in this is maybe a slight tangent. In the 90s, like growing up in the 90s, I could see that a 70-year-old person in the 90s would struggle with computer stuff because that was very manual, let's say. Well, nowadays it's an icon.
So in the 90s, you had to
code almost.
But you certainly had to know how to when a computer was freaking
Switch
out.
CDs.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's easy, but I think in fairness to that generation, and maybe we'll be like this in Scott and I will in 25 years' time or whatever. But
I think things are going to be easier and easier.
Even though it seems easy,
low code, no code
something.
type of
even though it seems easy, it's almost a concept itself. Like my grandmother always used to ask me the question, "What is the internet? Where is it?" So I think it's quite a good question. But there's
that episode of the IT Crowd where the internet's in that box.
Yeah, well, she couldn't even get beyond the idea of using it just because she couldn't get that into her head. So she almost refused to.
I have that with my dad.
Phil has this best anecdote. I can't remember who it was from his family or a friend or whatever, but somebody a bit older who said like, "This is Phil. Yeah, he writes for the internet."
He writes for the internet.
And I have it sometimes. Like my dad's a really smart guy, but sometimes it's just a confidence thing. Something will come up, and he'll just be like, "Oh fuck, I'm out of my depth." On this sort of techie thing,
and that's why sometimes my parents will ask me to sort stuff out for them. That I think, why couldn't you do that? But then I think, well, if I was that age, that generation, it is different. It's like I have this a little bit now actually with Rafa, my son, with some of the newer apps that are appearing, like Instagram and stuff like that. It's because I don't use them.
Or TikTok.
And then it's like, if you did want to use them, and it's like, well, how do you do this in the best way?
I can't
you can.
I can't get on with Instagram. I'm not inclined to use it.
When I pick up an Android phone, I instantly become 80 years old.
Yeah, totally. That's the same. That's the same.
For real,
thing.
like. My wife is like, "Can you turn off Bluetooth?" I'm like,
right, because you don't know where to find the settings.
I will find eventually.
Yeah. So my mum was like, she's got an Android phone, and she's like, "I'm really confused about how I do this and how I put the Wi-Fi on." And I was like, "Oh, I'll give it a go," but
you will find it eventually, but it will take you a while.
And so I can understand that it's difficult, and I think that those generations need to be supported to a certain extent. But I think that's
so those
ridiculous.
And other things that annoyed me about this. So I mean, that apparent typo, and maybe I've missed something, but I don't think I have. I took screenshots of both because I sort of led with that fuck up. And I do think it's unlikely that a quarter of households don't have some kind of connection.
Yeah.
But it was there. I've got the screenshot and everything. And then there was other little bits of sleight of hand. Like there was this false dichotomy of conflating digital exclusion. And they saw, well, the UK wants to be the centre of AI regulation and yet digital exclusion. Well, I don't... That's a false dichotomy.
Of AI regulation.
Yeah, and so they've got some stupid arbitrary ambition about being the place people look to for getting AI right, and which is a weird fucking ambition by itself.
It's a really weird ambition. But we need to define all the rules as to how this works.
Fuck knows why they come up with this stuff. But then they're going, but how can we do that when some people are digitally shit?
Yeah.
Well, that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need the whole population to be a coder.
No.
For us to chase that. Anyway, and like, here's a quote. There was some woman, the incredibly switched on sounding Baroness Stowell of Beeston.
Wow, what a brilliant name.
Yeah, who's
Stowell
the chair.
Of Beeston.
Baroness Stowell of Beeston.
I just spell her first name. That's a surname, is it? Baroness Stowell.
Stowell. She hasn't got a first name. She's just Baroness. Okay, that's all you need to know, mate. Name? You're not posh enough to know her fucking first name.
She's called B. Just call her B.
She's probably called Dave. Anyway, says, I was assuming the gender, but she is called Baroness. I mean, that's fair enough, isn't it?
She gets to be called Dave these days, Scott. Come on.
And the quote is, the government has bold ambitions to make UK a technology superpower and centre of AI development, but we can't deliver an exciting digital future when 5 million workers are underskilled in digital and nearly 2.5 million still can't complete a single basic digital task.
Where do they get these numbers from? Do they just pluck them out their arses?
I think so. Well, exactly, because there's so many definitions. What does underskilled mean?
Yeah.
And what is a single... I mean, they do... If you go into the report, and typically these reports are quite comprehensive, so they do list what these basic digital tasks are. But I don't know. It just came over as a very sort of politicised and a not very useful thing. And typically a lot of the media were just like, oh, it just shows that we've got a lot to do.
Yeah.
And anyway, so there's that. I'm going to cut that bit short because there's a few other little tangents I want to go on before we run out of time. At the same time, Parliament came out with an update about this online safety bill, which I've banged on about loads of times on the pod before, which is basically, as the name implies, it's a law that's designed to protect vulnerable people from some of the bad shit on the internet, especially kids. And no one can fault, if you're stopping little kids accidentally watching porn or even deliberately watching porn. I certainly won't thank me for saying it, but when my son was younger, he certainly wasn't just stumbling across this shit.
Yeah.
But you can't blame him. When you're a young kid, you're curious, aren't you? And the internet's weird. It wasn't like when we were kids, where if you're lucky, one of your mates would get hold of a copy of Razzle.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, I as a parent, and as a parent who's probably in some way failed in protecting his kids from this stuff when he was younger, I agree that I can't push back on that. But what worries me about this online safety bill is that the concern about kids, I think sometimes used as a battering ram for forcing through other stuff that involves just censoring adults and just protecting adults. And adults don't need protection.
Yeah.
That's the point of being a fucking adult. You're supposed to look after yourself, aren't you?
Yep.
And so the latest one's got further protections for children. But one thing that's contentious, this is an update to it, sorry. But one thing that's contentious within that is they're making the execs of internet platforms, the likes of Facebook, Google, etc., personally criminally liable if a kid spots some porn or something like that. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's precisely that. It could be something worse, like child exploitation material or something like that. But I think it's contentious to make individual execs criminally liable.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's going to happen as a result of it is they're not going to take any chances, are they? So they're just going to censor the fuck out of the internet because they don't want to be locked up. I mean, as I put it, they're going to err on the side of extreme censorship to avoid dawn raids from low-hanging fruit chasing coppers, because we all know that there's anecdotal examples of police chasing people for saying something a little bit intemperate on Twitter rather than catching fucking burglars and murderers. Yeah, low-hanging fruit.
Yeah,
that's what I mean by it.
You don't have to get on the street. You don't have to put your jogging trainers on and all that stuff and actually run down the road after a guy with a knife. It's much easier to get on for some bloke who goes, "Oh, you're all Nazis."
Well, quite. And then the other thing that was annoying about this update is that they didn't offer any clarity over stuff that I've ranted about before, which is this deliberately nebulous and constantly changing definition of harm. So there's this one stipulation within this bill where they want to still make these execs of these big tech companies, these internet platforms, liable for, quote, legal but harmful stuff. How can there be a law
that's absolutely ridiculous.
Sanctions stuff that's legal? I mean, the whole point of a law is to make something illegal.
That's absolutely dull. Is anybody scrutinising this stuff at all apart from you?
Yeah, plenty of other people are, but
even got through that someone actually wrote the word legal but harmful.
I know. It's fucking absurd. And it's been around for years.
Did the copy editor not go, "Are you a bunch of numpties? You've just written legal"?
No, I think it's far more sinister than that. I think they deliberately draft these laws in this way because they want to basically smuggle in extra state power without. And the problem is, each time, we were talking about like trial balloons earlier. Each time they come up with something, you'll get me, obviously, with what little influence I have, but you'll get publications like Spectator or Spiked or something like that, or people who've got a problem with it, and perhaps some more prominent independent journalists talking about it. And there'll be a lot of, and you'll get people like Big Brother Watch and these civil liberties organisations huffing and puffing, and then they all go quiet, and then a couple of months later they push it through anyway, once the hubbub has died down. This seems to be how these things happen. And then there's the other thing within this this online safety bill, which is to do with end-to-end encryption. So like we were talking about WhatsApp earlier. When we all WhatsApp each other, no one can hack into that. I mean, you can still get leaks like we had with Matt Hancock and Isabel Oakeshott, where someone chooses to share all their stuff.
Yeah.
And if we've got one little group just for the pod, just the three of us, and if I sent some particularly spicy joke, I am leaving myself open to one or both of you going to HR and going, look what this fucker's coming out with. Yeah. But I'm kind of counting on you not doing it.
Yeah, but he gave it to a journalist who's known for doing scoops and
well, exactly. He gave it to a journalist.
What an idiot!
But the point is, no one. If he hadn't done that, he broke the encryption by sharing it with someone else. Yeah. No one can hack into it. End-to-end encryption. Not even WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook or Meta, can hack into it. That's the whole point of end-to-end encryption. But what they're trying to do is, in the name of protecting children and catching nasty illegal imagery and material, we should be able to hack into people's messages. And everyone's saying, Meta's saying it, Apple said it this week, they're saying you can't do that because you fuck up the whole encryption thing. You can't have backdoors into encryption by definition.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that's going on there. And then one other thing I wanted to bang on about, I mean, there's loads of, actually there's two things I want to bang on about. One is Ireland. Ireland's getting very censorious.
I always want to bang on about Ireland.
Yeah. I love Ireland, but they're getting very censorious. There is...
they always have been, haven't they?
I think, yeah.
Sometimes previously it was religious. They've gone through a little period of like not being so religious. Now, they've discovered the internet.
They can be quite authoritarian, the Irish. They in some miscellaneous piece of legislation that covers all kinds of wide-reaching stuff, there was a little clause put in. Basically, there's the Irish Data Protection Commission, which sort of does roughly what you'd expect. They're to do with data privacy and all that sort of thing. But the reason they're more important than just Ireland is that most of these places, like these companies like Meta, have their European hub in Ireland. Right. I think primarily for tax reasons. Mm-hmm. And so...
It's the Dubai, isn't it, of the British Isles?
Yeah, the Cayman Islands or whatever. And so that means that the Irish Data Protection Commission, actually, its activities affect the whole of the EU bloc.
Yeah.
And they basically put in some other law that's unrelated to this, and I'll quote it. This is a passage that I extracted from the law. This clause they just inserted is to make provision, this is the quote, to make provision for enabling Data Protection Commission to prohibit the disclosure of confidential information by persons engaging with it in connection with the performance of certain functions, to issue a reprimand to a controller or process of certain circumstances. So that's very legalese. The long and short of it...
snappy, is it?
Not very snappy, but legalese isn't. Long and short of it is they want a law to say that anyone who complains to the Data Protection Commission can then not disclose any of the subsequent interactions. In other words, anything that the Data Protection Commission comes out with is by definition censored from the start. So that's quite authoritarian. And then Max Schrems, who you might have heard of, he had a case that's all to do with
that bloke in Nosferatu?
No. Well, could have been.
He's the actor in Nosferatu.
But this guy, I mean, I think he has some legislation against. No, he's not young Jamie. He has some legislation against Facebook ages ago to do with data protection, which I think kind of led to some of the GDPR stuff. He's a real trailblazer.
Max Schreck.
Right, he's Max Schrems.
Well.
And anyway, he did a tweet saying, instead of reacting to legitimate criticism on Ireland DPC's procedures, the Irish government wants to make criticism of GDPR procedures in Ireland a crime by making confidential.
Does he look like that?
Right. No, he doesn't look like that. Although I do remember that from Nosferatu. So there was that in Ireland, which is quite technical and in the weeds. But then there's some even more full-on stuff going on there. They've got another bill, which is like equivalent to our online safety bill, and it's called the Criminal Justice (brackets incitement to violence or hatred or hate offences) close bracket Bill 2022. And basically, they again get into this hate as a nebulous concept. And there's all sorts of problems with the term hate, partly because it gets into a bigger issue to do with things like protected groups.
Yeah.
So, so we're all straight white men in this room. So we're not protected. We don't have any protected group status at all. And we can understand historically why that's the case. The world, you could argue, has been run and dominated by maybe straight, but white men for millennia. So we understand the historical precedent why we feel the need to redress the balance a little bit. But when you start applying it to law, where if something is done to you, it has one legal status, and if something is done to someone else who's in a protected group, either through race or sex or sexual preference or whatever, then it has a completely different legal status. It opens up this whole minefield. In fact, they've just had, this is not a tangent I intend to go on, and I won't keep it for long, but they've just had a Supreme Court ruling in the States about what they call affirmative action in colleges. So for a while, Harvard University seemed to be actively discriminating against people of Asian ethnicity, which in itself is a really fucking dodgy category because Asia is a very big continent. Does that mean like South Asian, like Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan? Does it mean East Asian?
Yep.
Does it mean Russian? Does it mean Indonesian? Does it mean Australian? Whatever. Yep. Because in the States, they have a social engineering that they're trying to gear very much in favour of people of sort of African-Caribbean ethnicity, because they've got an understandable sense of historical guilt about slavery and Jim Crow and all that kind of crap. Anyway, but there's been this Supreme Court thing saying that's out of order. You can't discriminate on grounds of race. And so, but steering it back, this is one of the problems with this thing that's going on in Ireland right now, is they're coming up with hate, and hate is defined according to protected groups. There was... And these same people that flagged up, quite rightly, the Irish Council for Civil Liberties that flagged up the previous thing about the Irish Data Protection Commission are completely 180. They completely got it wrong on this other law. And I've got a quote from an ICCL policy officer called Luna Lara Liboni, which is a fucking great name. Yeah, that's an awesome name.
Is that something from a Harry Potter
for alliteration alone. And it said... And this is, quote, hate crimes are message crimes. I mean, what the fuck does that mean? One act can make an entire community feel excluded and unsafe. And she goes on, and I was like, it's hard to know where to start unpicking it. What is a message crime? What does excluded and unsafe mean? I mean, is it the role of legislation to get involved in people feeling excluded?
I know.
You and I spend most of the time talking. Pierre could feel excluded, but does the law need to back him up, or could he just butt in and go, oi, stop excluding me, you twats?
Yeah.
And then I embedded this little video of the, there's no way I think we could do it justice now, but there's this one MP in Ireland just talking about how the whole purpose of the law is to restrict liberties and to tell people what to do. And it's just so authoritarian. Anyway, so that's been sort of quite rambling and just me doing loads of talking. But I suppose the long and short of the point of all these things that I've sort of grouped together, the UK and the Irish one, under the general banner of politics, is there's more and more legislation going on, which, as you quite rightly pointed out a minute ago, Ian, probably goes under the radar for nearly all people, that is actually going to have a massive impact on our civil liberties, at least in the digital environment. Yeah, because that's easier to police. Sorry, go on.
They're sort of oblivious to it, I think, all of this. And like you said, I think it's only those publications that you named, like Unheard, is it? And
they're another
Spiked,
good one.
Which I mean, they have big. I know they have big readerships, those two, and Spectator particularly, but they're still not. They're not. It's not Philip Schofield. Well, not Philip Schofield anymore, but it's not daytime TV chat people sort of putting it.
He picked a good one there.
It's not those kinds of people raising.
No, for most people, they don't want to get into it. Sometimes I'll go on about this stuff to someone else, like my wife, and their eyes will glaze over, and it's like, fair enough. She doesn't have to find it interesting.
Because I don't think people see the implications of it down the road. That's the problem.
Yeah, or maybe they care less. I mean, I have to accept that part of my personality is that this stuff interests me more than it does most people.
They care less now, but if it went the way it could go, they wouldn't care less.
Well, that's it. So we're sort of extrapolating it, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're sort of trying to be the canaries in the coal mine, at least that's how I think of it.
That's why you've got to be quite careful about this stuff. If it does become legislative and people all of a sudden... I mean, I've seen weird things going on YouTube videos with guys, some some guy doing a little sort of speech about religion in the middle of a town square in some English town, and the police coming along and arresting him because on some kind of hate law, because and the bit that was shown on YouTube sounded all quite sort of normal anyway. It didn't sound very inflammatory at all, but.
Yeah, I can see my little LED of my camera flashing. Just one last thought.
Running out.
Yeah. One last thought on what you said there. That comes back to the protected group thing, because I bet if he was talking about a certain religion, they would have bollocked him.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole now. That's a good opportunity for me to cut myself short. So the LED is flashing, so we'll cut it short there, and we'll say thanks a lot for watching, and make sure you join us for the next one.